It was just another ordinary Tuesday at the small-town diner, the kind of place where the coffee was always fresh, the booths were worn but cozy, and the regulars came in like clockwork. The waitress, a young woman in her mid-twenties, moved briskly between tables, her apron stained with splashes of ketchup and coffee. She had been on her feet since 5 a.m., and the exhaustion was starting to creep into her bones. But she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Every tip, every dollar, mattered. The lunch rush had just ended, and the diner was quiet except for the low hum of the jukebox in the corner. That's when he walked in. He wasn't the kind of man who turned heads, at least not at first glance. Dressed in a simple button-down shirt and slacks, he looked like any other middle-aged customer. He chose a booth by the window, sat down, and ordered a cup of black coffee and a slice of apple pie. The waitress smiled politely, took his order, and brought his food without thinking much of it. But there was something about him. He had a calm presence, a quiet confidence that made her pause. When she refilled his coffee, he looked up at her and asked, "How's your day going?" It was a simple question, but the way he asked it felt different. Most customers didn't really care, they just wanted their food and their check. But this man seemed genuinely interested. She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Oh, the usual. Just trying to keep up." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. When he finished his meal, he handed her his credit card to pay the bill. She ran it through the machine, printed the receipt, and brought it back to him to sign. He scribbled something on the receipt, handed it back to her, and left without another word. It wasn't until she picked up the receipt that her heart skipped a beat. The total for his meal was $12.50. 12.50. But had if it left there was 1000. Her hands trembled as she stared at the number. She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and tell her it was a prank. But the diner was empty except for the cook wiping down the grill in the back. She flipped the receipt over and saw a note written in neat handwriting. "This is just the beginning." Her mind raced. Who was this man? Why would he leave her such an enormous tip? And what did he mean by his note? She felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. As she stood there, clutching the receipt, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. But she had no idea just how much. The waitress's name was Clara, though most people at the diner just called her sweetheart or honey. She had been working there for 3 years, ever since she dropped out of community college to take care of her family. Her mother had been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and the medical bills were piling up. Her younger brother, still in high school, relied on her for everything: food, clothes, even help with his homework. Clara was the glue holding their fragile little family together, but some days, it felt like she was barely holding on. Her mornings started before the sun came up. She'd wake up in the small, cramped apartment she shared with her family, make sure her brother had breakfast, and then head to the diner for her shift. After work, she'd rush home to check on her mother, who spent most of her days in bed, too weak to do much else. Clara would cook dinner, help her brother with his studies, and then collapse into bed, only to do it all over again the next day. Money was always tight. Her paycheck from the diner barely covered the rent and groceries, let alone her mother's medications. Clara had learned to stretch every dollar, cutting corners wherever she could. She hadn't bought herself new clothes in years, and the idea of going back to school felt like a distant dream. But Clara never complained. She had a quiet strength about her, a resilience that kept her going even on the hardest days. She believed that if she just kept working, kept pushing forward, things would eventually get better. That's why the $1,000 tip felt like a miracle. When she got home that night, she showed the receipt to her mother, who burst into tears. "Maybe this is our turning point," her mother said, clutching Clara's hand. "Maybe things are finally looking up." Clara wanted to believe it. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was too good to be true. Who would just give away that kind of money to a stranger? And what did the note mean? "This is just the beginning." Was it a promise? A warning? She didn't know, and the uncertainty kept her awake that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The next few days were a blur. Clara used part of the money to pay off some of her mother's medical bills, and she even treated her brother to a new pair of sneakers. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was tinged with fear. What if the man came back and asked for the money back? What if it was all some kind of mistake? Her co-workers at the diner noticed the change in her. "You've been smiling more," the cook remarked one morning as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "Did you win the lottery or something?" Clara just laughed and shook her head. "Something like that," she said, though she didn't elaborate. She wasn't ready to share the story yet. It still felt too surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. But then, a week later, the man returned. It was a rainy afternoon when he walked back into the diner. Clara was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see him standing there, shaking water off his coat. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him again, and yet, here he was, calm and composed as if he hadn't just turned her life upside down. He took the same booth by the window, and Clara hesitated for a moment before grabbing a menu and walking over to him. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she forced herself to smile. "Welcome back," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. He looked up at her and smiled warmly. "Thank you. It's good to be back." She handed him the menu, but he didn't open it. "I'll just have the usual," he said. "Black coffee and apple pie." Clara nodded and hurried to place the order, her mind racing. What should she say to him? Should she thank him for the tip? Ask him why he did it? Before she could decide, the cook called out that the order was ready. She carried the coffee and pie to his table, setting them down carefully. "Here you go," she said, lingering for a moment. He looked up at her again, his eyes kind but piercing, as if he could see right through her. "How have you been?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. No one ever asked her that, not in a way that felt genuine, anyway. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I've been, okay. Busy, you know. Just trying to keep up." He nodded, as if he understood. "It's not easy, is it? Working hard, taking care of others, trying to make ends meet." Clara blinked, surprised by how accurately he'd summed up her life. "No, it's not," she admitted quietly. He took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "What's your story?" Clara wasn't sure why, but she found herself opening up to him. Maybe it was the way he listened, really listened, without judgment or pity. She told him about her mother's illness, her brother's struggles in school, and her own dreams of going back to college one day. She even confessed how overwhelmed she'd felt when she saw the tip he'd left her. "I didn't know what to do," she said. "It was so much money. I kept thinking maybe it was a mistake, or I don't know, some kind of test." The man smiled faintly. "It wasn't a mistake," he said. "And it wasn't a test either. Sometimes, people just need a little help to get started." Clara frowned, not sure what to make of his words. "But why me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." He leaned back in his seat, studying her for a moment. "I know enough," he said. "I can see how hard you work, how much you care about your family. You deserve a chance, Clara." Her eyes widened. She hadn't told him her name. How did he know? Before she could ask, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table toward her. "This is for you," he said. Clara stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "Open it and see," he said. With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a check, not for 1,000 T H I S T I M E B U T F O R 1000 this time, but for 50,000. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. I can't accept this, she stammered. Yes, you can, he said firmly. And you should. Use it to take care of your family. Use it to go back to school. Use it to build the life you deserve. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. But, why are you doing this? He smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile. Because someone once did the same for me, he said. And now it's my turn to pay it forward. Before she could respond, he stood up, leaving the check on the table. Take care of yourself, Clara, he said. This is just the beginning. And with that, he walked out of the diner, leaving her standing there, clutching the check and wondering if any of this was real. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the diner, the check clutched tightly in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, gratitude, fear, and disbelief all swirling together. She glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and tell her this was some elaborate prank. But the diner was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. She slipped the check into her apron pocket and finished her shift in a daze. Every time she thought about the amount written on that piece of paper, her stomach twisted into knots. $50,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It could change everything, pay off her mother's medical bills, help her brother finish school, maybe even give her a chance to go back to college. But it also felt too good to be true. When her shift ended, Clara walked home slowly, her thoughts racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the man's words, "This is just the beginning." What did that mean? Was he planning to give her more money? Or was this it, a one-time act of kindness that she was supposed to make the most of? She didn't tell her family about the check right away. She needed time to process it, to figure out what to do. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the check hidden under her pillow. She thought about depositing it, about finally being able to breathe without the constant weight of financial stress. But she also thought about the risks. What if the check bounced? What if the man changed his mind and demanded the money back? What if there were strings attached that she couldn't see? The next day, Clara decided to confide in her best friend, Lisa. They met at a small park near the diner, and Clara handed her the check without a word. Lisa's eyes nearly popped out of her head. "Are you kidding me?" Lisa exclaimed, holding the check up to the light as if checking for a watermark. "Clara, this is insane. Do you know who this guy is?" Clara shook her head. "No. He's just a customer who came into the diner. He left me $1,000 tip the first time and now this. I don't know what to do." Lisa stared at her, wide-eyed. "What do you mean, you don't know what to do? You deposit it, obviously. This could change your life. But what if it's a scam?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "What if he's some kind of con artist, and I end up in trouble?" Lisa frowned, considering this. "Okay, that's a fair point. But I don't know, Clara. This doesn't feel like a scam. It feels like a miracle. Maybe you should just take the risk." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. I need to think about it." For the next few days, Clara carried the check with her everywhere, too afraid to deposit it but too hopeful to throw it away. She found herself replaying her conversations with the man in her mind, trying to figure out his motives. He had said someone once helped him in the same way. Was he just paying it forward? Or was there more to it? Finally, after a week of agonizing over the decision, Clara made up her mind. She would deposit the check. If it cleared, she would use the money to help her family and start building a better future. If it didn't, well, she would deal with that if it happened. She went to the bank early one morning, her heart pounding as she handed the check to the teller. The woman behind the counter raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything as she processed the transaction. Clara held her breath, waiting for the teller to tell her the check was fake or that there was some kind of problem. But the teller just smiled and handed her a receipt. "The funds should be available in your account by tomorrow," she said. Clara walked out of the bank in a daze, the weight of the check finally lifted from her shoulders. It was real. The money was real. And now, she had to figure out what to do with it. With the money safely in her account, Clara felt a mix of relief and unease. She had taken the leap, but now she was faced with a new challenge, figuring out who the mysterious man was and why he had chosen to help her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, and she was determined to find out. The first thing she did was search online for any clues about the man. She didn't have much to go on, just his first name, which he had mentioned casually during their last conversation, Daniel. She typed Daniel and philanthropist into the search bar, along with the name of her town, but nothing came up. Frustrated, she decided to try a different approach. She went back to the diner and asked her coworkers if they remembered anything about the man. The cook shrugged and said, "He just seemed like a regular guy. Quiet, polite. Didn't stand out much." But Clara wasn't ready to give up. She spent hours scrolling through news articles and social media posts, looking for any mention of a wealthy man named Daniel who had a history of helping strangers. Finally, late one night, she stumbled upon something that made her heart race. It was an article from a few years ago, titled "Local Billionaire Pays Off Medical Debt for Hundreds of Families." The article featured a photo of a man in his 50s, dressed in a simple suit, standing in front of a hospital. Clara's eyes widened as she recognized him. It was the same man who had come into the diner. According to the article, Daniel had made his fortune in the tech industry but had dedicated the last decade of his life to philanthropy. He had a reputation for helping people in quiet, understated ways, paying off debts, funding scholarships, and even buying groceries for struggling families. He rarely gave interviews and preferred to keep his acts of kindness private. Clara read the article 3 times, her mind racing. So, he wasn't just a generous stranger, he was a billionaire with a history of helping people. But why had he chosen her? What made her stand out? She decided to dig deeper. She found a few more articles about Daniel, each one painting a picture of a man who had started with nothing and worked his way to the top. He had grown up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. He had dropped out of college to start his own business, and through hard work and determination, he had built an empire. But instead of hoarding his wealth, he had chosen to give it away, often to people who reminded him of his younger self. Clara felt a lump in her throat as she read about his life. She could see why he had been drawn to her story. She was just like him, struggling to take care of her family while dreaming of a better future. But that didn't explain why he had given her so much money. Was it just a random act of kindness, or was there something more to it? She thought about reaching out to him, but she didn't know how. He hadn't left any contact information, and she didn't even know his last name. All she had was the memory of his kind eyes, and the words he had spoken. "This is just the beginning." A few days later, Clara received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to her in neat, elegant handwriting, and her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. "Clara, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to let you know that the money I gave you is just the first step. You have so much potential, and I believe in you. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you an opportunity to work with my foundation. We help people like you, people who just need a chance to shine. Let me know if you're interested. Sincerely, Daniel." Clara's hands trembled as she read the letter. This was it. The answer she had been looking for. But it also raised new questions. What kind of opportunity was he offering? And was she ready to take it? Clara stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing with possibilities. Working with Daniel's foundation? It sounded like a dream come true, but it also felt overwhelming. She had never worked in philanthropy before, and the idea of stepping into such a world was both exciting and terrifying. She spent the next few days thinking about the offer. She talked to her mother, who urged her to take the chance. "You've been given an incredible opportunity," her mother said, her voice weak but filled with determination. "Don't let fear hold you back." Her brother, too, encouraged her. "You've always taken care of us," he said. "Now it's time to take care of yourself." With her family's support, Clara decided to take the leap. She wrote a letter back to Daniel, expressing her gratitude and interest in the opportunity. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't let fear stop her from pursuing something that could change her life. A week later, she received a response. Daniel invited her to meet him at his foundation's headquarters in the city. The letter included a train ticket and instructions for where to go. Clara felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she packed her bag and prepared for the trip. The train ride was a blur. Clara spent most of it staring out the window, her mind racing with questions. What would the foundation be like? What would Daniel expect from her? And most importantly, was she ready for this? When she arrived at the foundation's headquarters, she was struck by how unassuming it was. She had expected a towering skyscraper, but instead, she found herself standing in front of a modest building with a simple sign that read the Daniel Foundation. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. Daniel greeted her with a warm smile. "Clara, it's good to see you again," he said, shaking her hand. "Thank you for coming." He led her to a small conference room, where they sat down to talk. Daniel explained that his foundation focused on helping people who were struggling to overcome financial and personal challenges. "We believe in giving people the tools they need to succeed," he said. "And we believe in you." Clara listened intently as Daniel outlined the opportunity he was offering her. The foundation would provide her with a full scholarship to finish her education, along with a paid internship that would allow her to gain experience in the nonprofit sector. "This isn't charity," Daniel said firmly. "This is an investment in your potential." Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. It's more than I ever dreamed of." Daniel smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll make the most of it." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I will. I promise." Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into her new role. She enrolled in online classes to finish her degree and started her internship at the foundation. The work was challenging, but it was also incredibly rewarding. She helped organize fundraising events, assisted with grant applications, and even worked directly with families who were receiving support from the foundation. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was making a real difference. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. And she knew she had Daniel to thank for it. Clara's new life was a whirlwind of activity. Between her classes, her internship, and her responsibilities at home, she barely had time to catch her breath. But for the first time in years, she felt alive. She was learning, growing, and contributing in ways she had never imagined. The foundation's work was both inspiring and demanding. Clara quickly realized that philanthropy wasn't just about giving money, it was about understanding people's needs, building relationships, and creating sustainable solutions. She worked closely with a team of dedicated professionals who taught her the ins and outs of nonprofit management. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Clara faced challenges that tested her resilience and determination. There were days when she felt overwhelmed by the workload, when self-doubt crept in and whispered that she wasn't good enough. She struggled to balance her new responsibilities with her family obligations, often staying up late to finish assignments or help her brother with his homework. One particularly tough day, Clara found herself on the verge of tears. She had spent hours preparing a presentation for the foundation's board, only to have it criticized for being too emotional and not data-driven enough. She felt like a failure, like she didn't belong in this world of high-stakes decision-making. That evening, she called Lisa, her voice trembling as she poured out her frustrations. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. What if I'm not cut out for it? Lisa listened patiently, then said, Clara, do you remember what you told me when I was scared to apply for that promotion? You said, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. Well, now it's my turn to say it to you. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep going. Her friend's words struck a chord. Clara realized that she had been putting too much pressure on herself, expecting to excel at everything right away. She needed to give herself grace and remember that growth takes time. The next day, Clara approached her supervisor at the foundation and asked for feedback on how to improve her presentation. To her surprise, the woman was impressed by her initiative. It's not about getting it right the first time, she said. It's about being willing to learn and adapt. And that's exactly what you're doing. With renewed determination, Clara threw herself into her work. She spent extra hours researching and analyzing data, determined to prove that she could balance emotion with evidence. When she presented her revised work to the board, she received nods of approval and even a few compliments. It was a small victory, but it gave her the confidence to keep pushing forward. As the months went by, Clara began to find her rhythm. She learned to manage her time more effectively, setting boundaries to ensure she had enough energy for both her work and her family. She also started to see the impact of her efforts. She met families who had been helped by the foundation's programs, parents who could finally afford their children's medical treatments, students who had received scholarships to pursue their dreams. Their stories reminded her why she was doing this work and gave her the strength to keep going. But the biggest change was within Clara herself. She no longer saw herself as just a waitress struggling to get by. She was a student, a professional, and a change-maker. She had discovered strengths she didn't know she had: resilience, creativity, and a deep empathy for others. One evening, as she sat at her desk finishing an assignment, Clara realized something: she was happy. Not just content, but truly happy. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Clara grew more confident in her role at the foundation, she began to think about how she could use her newfound skills and resources to help others in her community. She remembered the struggles she had faced, the sleepless nights worrying about bills, the constant stress of trying to make ends meet, and she wanted to make sure no one else had to go through that alone. One day, she approached Daniel with an idea. What if we started a program to help single parents and caregivers, she suggested. People like my mom, who are doing everything they can to take care of their families, but just need a little support to get by. Daniel listened intently, his eyes lighting up as Clara outlined her vision. She proposed a program that would provide financial assistance, childcare services, and career training to single parents and caregivers. It's not just about giving them money, she explained. It's about giving them the tools they need to build a better life for themselves and their families. Daniel smiled. I love it, he said. Let's make it happen. With Daniel's support, Clara threw herself into creating the program. She worked tirelessly, meeting with community leaders, researching best practices, and drafting a detailed proposal. She even reached out to families in her own neighborhood to hear their stories and understand their needs. The program, which they named Bright Futures, launched a few months later. Clara was nervous but excited as she stood in front of a room full of families at the program's first orientation session. She shared her own story, talking about her struggles and how the foundation had changed her life. I know how hard it is to feel like you're alone, she said. But I also know that with a little help, anything is possible. The response was overwhelming. Families lined up to sign up for the program, their faces filled with hope and gratitude. Clara worked closely with each family, helping them set goals and create action plans. She connected them with resources, from job training programs to affordable childcare, and cheered them on every step of the way. One of the first families to join the program was a single mother named Maria, who had been working 2 jobs to support her 3 children. With the help of Bright Futures, Maria was able to enroll in a nursing program and secure reliable childcare for her kids. This program has changed our lives, Maria told Clara, tears in her eyes. I finally feel like I can breathe again." Stories like Maria's fueled Clara's passion for the work. She saw firsthand the impact that a little support could have, and it inspired her to do even more. She began organizing workshops on financial literacy, parenting skills, and career development, bringing in experts to share their knowledge with the families in the program. But Clara didn't stop there. She also started a scholarship fund for high school students from low-income families, using part of the money Daniel had given her to get it off the ground. She wanted to give other young people the same chance she had been given, the chance to dream big and pursue their goals. As the months went by, Clara's work began to attract attention. Local newspapers ran stories about the Bright Futures program, and Clara was invited to speak at community events and conferences. She used these opportunities to advocate for systemic change, calling on policymakers to invest in programs that supported families and caregivers. Through it all, Clara remained humble and grounded. She never forgot where she came from or the struggles she had faced. And she never stopped believing in the power of kindness and compassion. Years had passed since Clara first met Daniel in that small-town diner. So much had changed since then. She had finished her degree, built a career she was proud of, and made a lasting impact on her community through the Bright Futures program. But despite all her success, Clara never forgot the moment that had started it all, the moment a stranger's kindness had changed her life forever. One sunny afternoon, Clara decided to visit the diner where it had all begun. It had been years since she'd last set foot inside, but the place looked exactly the same. The same worn booths, the same jukebox in the corner, the same smell of coffee and apple pie wafting through the air. She took a seat at the counter and ordered a cup of coffee. The waitress who served her was young, probably in her early 20s, with tired eyes and a weary smile. Clara recognized the look, it was the same one she had worn all those years ago. As she sipped her coffee, Clara struck up a conversation with the waitress. "Long shift?" she asked. The waitress nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, it's been a busy day. But I can't complain. Gotta pay the bills, you know?" Clara smiled. "I used to work here," she said. "A long time ago." The waitress raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Really? What do you do now?" Clara told her story, how she had been a waitress just like her, struggling to make ends meet, until a kind stranger had given her a chance to turn her life around. She talked about the foundation, the Bright Futures program, and all the lives she had been able to touch because of that one act of kindness. The waitress listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. "That's amazing," she said. "I wish something like that would happen to me." Clara reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check for $1,000 and a note that read, "This is just the beginning." She handed it to the waitress, who stared at it in disbelief. "I can't accept this," the waitress stammered. "Yes, you can," Clara said gently. "And you should. Use it to take care of yourself. Use it to dream big. And when you're ready, pay it forward." Tears filled the waitress's eyes as she clutched the envelope. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." Clara smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll make the most of it." As Clara left the diner that day, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come full circle, from being the recipient of kindness to being the one who offered it. And she knew that the ripple effect of that kindness would continue to spread, touching countless lives in ways she could never imagine. The story of Clara and Daniel wasn't just about money or opportunities. It was about the power of compassion, the importance of believing in others, and the incredible impact one act of kindness can have. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult life may seem, there is always hope, and that sometimes all it takes is one person to change everything. As Clara walked away from the diner, she looked up at the sky and smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: kindness was a gift that kept on giving, and she would spend the rest of her life paying it forward.